The Scientist by Talking Soup. Chapter 7. The Save Point. Gaster paced his office. When he wasn't pacing his office, he paced through the halls and the laboratories, making the staff nervous. Gaster didn't care. He was furious with himself. He had lost his temper. He had pushed Sans too hard. When you were trying to convince someone to do something, to do the right thing, you had to know when to pull back. Gaster had always known when to pull back before now, but he'd let his desperation and determination control him. It had been hours now with no word from Sans and no reports from the Royal Guard. Gaster's friend, his best scientist, might be a pile of dust in some lost corner of Waterfall for all he knew. The human could be as dead as well, or they could be carving their way through Waterfall right at this moment. Not knowing something was usually the lifeblood of a scientist, but right now Gaster just felt like it was killing him. The hours dragged on. Some of the staff began to leave as the workday drew to a close. Plenty of them always stayed late to finish up this or that experiment. Usually Gaster was eager to have the whole lab to himself at night, but right now he didn't think he could take the silence of the empty halls. Gaster was in his office going over the notes on the Orange Soul for about the 1000th time when he heard raised voices out near the front door to the lab. Something had changed. He almost knocked his chair over in his scramble for his office door. He burst into the hall. A handful of scientists had collected in the entryway. Some of them were shouting. One of them cheered. Gaster could just make out what they were saying.
I can't believe it!
Amazing! We're safe! How did you do it, Sans? And there among them was Sans. Gaster almost sagged with relief. The skeleton was a bit muddy and covered in grass, but he looked no worse for the wear. It was hard to read his expression from this distance. Tucked under Sans' arm was a soul container.
Oh, you know,
Sans was saying.
I just got lucky, I guess.
Sans looked past the gaggle of scientists and finally noticed Gaster.
But I can tell you guys all about it later. Better hand this off to the boss, right?
The scientists laughed, turning to see Gaster. One of them waved at him.
Dr. Sans brought the soul! That's 3 souls now! We're almost halfway there!
Gaster smiled warmly.
Indeed we are. This is cause for celebration. Why don't you all take the rest of the night off? It has been a stressful day. I think this all warrants a round of drinks at Grilby's. You can tell him to put it on my tab.
This caused quite a bit of surprised, excited chatter. Gaster wasn't exactly known for his generosity or frivolity, but it did the trick. Soon the scientists had dispersed, leaving Sans and Gaster alone. Sans hadn't moved from the entryway.
Sans, I can't tell you how relieved I am that you are all right.
Sans walked toward Gaster, shifting the soul container into his hand. Up close, Gaster could now see Sans' expression. He looked exhausted, strained.
I know that it must have been extremely stressful, but you are alive, and the underground is safe, thanks to...
Sans reached Gaster, held up the soul container and shoved it against Gaster's chest. Not hard enough to hurt, but hard enough to be startling. Here. Gaster blinked down at Sans for a moment in surprise. Sans wasn't meeting his gaze. Gaster took the soul carefully. It was a deep, shimmering blue. Gaster remembered this color, like an ocean, or like twilight.
Sans.
He hesitated, studying his friend. Free of the soul, Sans had shoved his hands in his pockets and was staring into the air at something near Gaster's chest.
I am sorry,
Gaster said slowly, trying to choose the right words.
I did not mean to push you so hard, I only...
Gaster. Gaster went quiet. Sans glanced up at him, meeting Gaster's eyes for just a moment. Please don't make me do something like that again. Sans' voice sounded hollow. Gaster stared down at him. The hallway was thankfully empty, and the quiet seemed at once oppressive.
I asked you to do the right thing, and you did it. I know I pushed you too hard. I said some things that I regret, but I did not make you do anything, Sans.
Sans hunched over a little and let out a short, sharp bark of laughter.
Ha! Yeah, you're right. You're right, Doc. It's not like you forced me. I could have just let the kid go. Just let them wander off, maybe kill some more monsters. Maybe not. Whatever. It doesn't matter.
Sans moved past Gaster. Gaster caught him by the shoulder before he could get far. Sans pulled out of his grasp.
Sans, I think we should talk about this.
Sans' grin was completely mirthless.
I killed a kid, Doc. What else is there to say?
That is just it, Sans. You did the right thing. Child or not, it was a threat to the entire underground. In one way or another, the human was always going to die.
Gaster indicated the soul in his hands.
We needed this soul. One way or another, we were going to get it.
He reached out to Sans again, but Sans pulled back.
Yeah, one way or another. I need to go change. I've got a lot to catch up on. And we better start work on that soul tonight, yeah?
Gaster frowned, considering Sans. The skeleton started to turn away, but this time Gaster caught him.
Sans.
Let go.
Sans' voice was completely neutral when he said it, but it still made a sharp pang through Gaster. He let go.
Perhaps you should take the rest of the night off. I am concerned about you. Perhaps a good night's rest will serve you well. You've had a rough day.
That got a reaction from Sans, but not the one Gaster had been expecting. The skeleton tensed, frowning.
No, I want to work.
Really, Sans, I insist. Go home, be with your brother, get some sleep.
No.
Sans shook his head.
No, I'm fine, Doc. I just need to work, okay? I can't... Gaster, I just can't go home and see Papyrus and go to sleep. I need to work, all right? Can you understand that? Can you understand that much?
Gaster folded his arms and sighed heavily. He understood. He knew plenty about throwing yourself into work to avoid reality. He also knew how unhealthy it could be. But he couldn't force Sans to go home. He had done enough damage already.
Very well. Get changed and meet me down in the basement labs in half an hour. I'll call Dr. Betas and see if he wishes to join us.
Sans closed his eye sockets in relief. Then he nodded, turned, and stalked away down the corridor without another word. Gaster watched him go, then looked down at the blue soul. It was hard to stay concerned about Sans when he held the third human soul in his hands. Gaster smiled once Sans was out of sight. He had a good feeling about this one. The blue soul changed everything. The first night after beginning research, they found something extraordinary: save power. After all this time, they finally had a human soul who had saved at least once in the past. It was lucky that they had captured the soul when they did, otherwise the human might have reset and returned to before their death. Then again, perhaps that had already happened. There was no way of knowing. They had it at last, save power. And not just that, but the blue soul had provided a new wealth of determination, as well as what Gaster had tentatively decided to call kill power. Like the human with the orange soul, it appeared that this human had killed only one monster, so their power had never increased very much. Still, it proved that the energy associated with killing was easily measurable.
We've got to come up with a better term than kill power, Sans said constantly. It's a bit too on the nose.
Gaster let Sans and Dr. Betas think about that. He was too busy studying all the other things the soul had provided. The magic technicians had discovered something truly fascinating about the soul, an aspect that would allow for a magic that actually affected the souls of others. It was an extremely powerful magic, not something that the average monster would be able to manage. Monsters, of course, were lining up to try and learn it, but as far as Gaster knew, no one was ever successful. The magic was very specific. It applied gravity to the soul of the person it was used against, pinning them to the ground and restricting their movements. A monster would need a specific type of magic to begin with if they were going to have any chance of using it. Ironically, or perhaps fatefully, one monster with the perfect skill set for learning blue magic was Sans.
Altering the gravity of something is very similar to telekinesis after all.
Gaster explained one night as he flipped through a report on the subject from one of the magic technicians.
You are naturally predisposed towards blue magic. It would essentially allow you to move a soul around as you wished, without actually harming the host in the process. A boost to your natural telekinesis.
Sans said from where he sat at his computer. He hadn't really looked up. Gaster watched him for a moment.
You could, perhaps, think of it as a way to honor the human, if you wanted.
Sans was quiet for a minute before answering. Maybe. I'll think about it. That was the best Gaster could hope for. He had been very careful with Sans these past few months, trying to give him the space he needed and not be too demanding. It was difficult. There was a lot he really needed from Sans, but Gaster was willing to give Sans plenty of time to recover. Sans had gone back to his usual friendly, joking self rather quickly, but underneath the familiar demeanor something was always different. Sans had changed since his run-in with the human. Sometimes his laughter seemed a bit forced. He worked longer nights and fell asleep at his desk in the day more often. Other members of the staff had noticed and either expressed their concern or complained about Sans' lazy attitude. Sans always laughed it off. Gaster, for his part, had eventually just stopped asking how Sans was doing. The answer was always the same. He was fine. No big deal. He was just tired lately, that was all. Wasn't he such a lazybones? Gaster had settled for just keeping an eye on Sans and trying to make his life a little easier. In any case, Gaster couldn't focus on Sans as much as he wanted to. He had other things to think about, namely the Blue Soul's save power. It was finally time to put his determination to good use. Every night, even after Sans had gone home, Gaster was still in the basement laboratory, studying save power and trying to figure out how to use it. Without reset, a save was little more than a sort of insurance, but learning to save was just the first step. Reset would come eventually. Gaster had determination enough to be patient. In fact, his determination had been rather overwhelming of late. It was getting harder to control. Sometimes a headache would come on, sudden and sharp, only to disappear a moment later. His bullets would occasionally manifest without him actually summoning them. He had dreams where he was melting or breaking apart. Trying to save provided a sorely needed outlet for all of that determination. The problem was that, over the weeks and the months of trying, one thing had become very clear. Saving was going to require an incredible amount of determination, possibly more than Gaster had access to. Late at night, with no one around, after hours of trying and failing, it was very easy to let his eyes stray to the storage room, where the old determination extractor had been moved. It would be easy enough to hook up the determination extractor one more time, extract some determination from the Blue Soul, and simply inject himself again. But Gaster was already dealing rather poorly with the determination he did have. More determination might just kill him. There had to be another option. Gaster considered magic. A long time ago, Sans had compared both magic and determination to a glue that held humans and monsters together. Judging by his own experiences with determination, the two were indeed virtually incompatible. But at the same time, they augmented each other. Perhaps he could use extra magic in place of extra determination, like substituting something in a cooking recipe. Monster souls had a limited capacity when it came to magic, however, even Gaster. If he was going to increase his magic, he would first need to increase his soul's capacity. That meant breaking out Dr. Beatus's repurposed X-ray machine again. Gaster made a few adjustments so that the Blue Soul could be slotted in next to the Orange and Cyan souls. He made sure the entire lab was devoid of staff, made his way to the X-ray room, and prepared himself for the worst. There was no pain, however. Not the kind of pain that Gaster had seen in Sans. Perhaps his soul was just that much more powerful, or it was his determination at work again. It was a rush, almost exactly like when he had first injected himself with determination. Magic flooded him and infused his every atom. He could feel it fighting for its place alongside the determination, and that was painful, but nothing Gaster couldn't bear. When it was over, he felt more powerful than ever, like he could single-handedly shatter the barrier. Another crack had appeared in his face, on the left side this time. His vision went strange, stranger than before. He studied himself in a mirror after he had safely hidden the X-ray machine again and cleaned up the room. His left eye, the one that still saw color, had acquired a strange glow, like a bluish flame. Turning it off was as simple as thinking about it, but it made his vision odd. It was like he was seeing television static through his left eye, or a glitching computer screen. Things would dart around his field of vision, disappear, reappear, as if he was trying to see multiple images at once. The combined effect with the colorblindness of his right eye was rather nauseating, but Gaster figured he would get used to it. He'd gotten used to the determination, after all. Unpleasant side effects, sure, but it didn't matter. He was stronger. He could use cyan, orange, and blue attacks now with no effort at all. His magic felt boundless. Less than an hour later, Gaster created a save point. It was such a tiny thing. All those years of hard work and experimentation and sacrifice, and there it was, a tiny flickering light on his office floor. Such an oddly simple thing. It was as though he had grabbed a fistful of the fabric of space-time and nailed it to the floor. The most exciting scientific accomplishment in years. And yet, the longer he stared at the soft glow of the save, the stranger it began to look. There was something wrong about it. Gaster couldn't tell what it was. It was a feeling more than anything. Perhaps his left eye was just making him dizzy. It didn't matter. It didn't matter. Gaster chuckled quietly to himself. It didn't matter. He would study it, and then he would fix it. He looked up, out his office window, to where the core glowed in the distance. Soon now. The looks on Sans and Dr. Beatus's faces were absolutely priceless.
I can't believe it.
How the hell did you pull this off, Doc? They were inside his office, standing around the save, staring into the warm glow with unconcealed awe. Sans had crouched down to see it closer. Gaster stood behind them with his arms folded, letting himself be as proud and excited as he truly was.
I have extensive notes,
he said, reaching back to pat a thick folder on his desk.
You are both free to read through them for the specific details.
The notes weren't even lies. Not entirely. They just left out the parts about what Gaster had done to himself. It wasn't like he could hide the effects entirely. The new crack in his face hadn't gone away.
Essentially, it was a matter of drawing power from all three souls. Creating a save point, it seems, takes a rather absurd amount of determination. I dare say that if a single human with that much determination were to ever come along, they would have the power to overwrite the entire world to suit their whims.
Yeah, no kidding, Sans said, standing back up and rubbing the back of his skull in amazement.
That amount of determination combined with the natural save power of the blue soul were enough to essentially, artificially, use my own magic to generate a save. With some complex algorithms and even more complex magic. It was, well, not simple, but doable. Though, of course.
Gaster gingerly touched the new crack on his face. It didn't hurt, but it felt wrong. Wrong in the same sort of way that the save did.
Of course it took its toll.
I didn't want to ask about that since it seemed impolite,
Dr. Beatus admitted, looking up at Gaster with concern.
But are you actually okay, Doctor? It reminds me of that time a while ago when you were attacked. I know you didn't take the day off then, but using that much magic to do something no other monster has done...
Gaster laughed and clapped his scientists on the shoulders. Dr. Betis squeaked a little in surprise.
Oh, I appreciate your concern, Dr. Betis. Truly, even I will admit that I am quite worn out. But how could I take a day off after creating this?
He gazed down at the save point. It hurt to look at, but he couldn't look away.
This is one of the greatest accomplishments of my entire scientific career, and I could not possibly have done it without the help of both of you.
He let go of them both. It would probably be strange if Dr. W.D. Gaster suddenly hugged his two favorite scientists. Oh gosh, well... Doc, you know we're only doing our jobs.
And I appreciate it, endlessly.
He smiled down at them.
But our work is certainly not over. This is just a large step forward, a step toward the true goal, reset. And on that note, don't we have a time machine to work on?
Sans honestly hadn't given Gaster's suggestion a second thought. The problem was that Papyrus wanted to learn about blue attacks, possibly as much as he wanted to join the Royal Guard.
It is a chance to stand out, to prove to the whole Underground and the Royal Guard just how great I really am. No one else has been able to use blue attacks after all. Blue attacks seem so cool. A cool power for the coolest skeleton.
You're already the coolest skeleton, bro.
This is true. But think of how much cooler I will be with a power like that!
This had gone on for months now, ever since the Science Division had revealed the nature of blue magic to the Underground, and offered tests and such for monsters to try their luck at learning it. As soon as Papyrus had found out there was an incredible magic that was not only very hard to use, but also affected the soul, he had been obsessed. At first, Sans tried to talk him out of it, and at first, it had worked. For a long while, Sans simply couldn't even handle discussing the blue soul. Not at home. Working with the soul at the lab was stressful enough as it was. Every time Sans looked at the warm blue glow, he remembered.
Who's there? Who's there? I'm sorry.
He hadn't even told Papyrus what he had done, and of course he never ever would. Papyrus had picked up on Sans' reluctance immediately. Brothers were intuitive like that. For several weeks after, Papyrus hadn't said a word about the blue soul, and had made a point of never asking Sans how work was going. But as time had gone by and Sans had started sleeping a little better and getting some of his old cheer back, Papyrus had slowly started bringing it up again. Soon it got to be a daily thing, Papyrus asking every night if maybe tomorrow he could learn about the blue attacks maybe? Sans would always answer with a maybe. Finally, though, Sans gave in. You could only handle so much of Papyrus's sad skeleton puppy act before you buckled. I'll be honest though, bro. I'm really not sure how to teach you. I know the theory and the science behind blue magic, but it's not like I know how to use it. It's not like light blue attacks, that's for sure. Papyrus had taken to light blue attacks like a washer would a soap. He could be as dense as lead about certain things, but that never meant that he wasn't clever.
Clearly you should learn how to use blue magic as well, brother. Then we can learn and fail and try again together.
That was that. And if Sans was honest with himself, it was also the best option. There was only one monster in the Underground who could successfully use blue magic. Gaster had never actually explained how that was, but Sans didn't really expect Gaster to explain everything, especially not lately. The problem was that Gaster didn't like Papyrus. He never said as much, and he was always polite when he and Papyrus were in the same room, but Sans noticed the look Gaster got when Sans talked about his brother. Papyrus could be a handful, and Gaster certainly wasn't alone in his completely wrong opinions. But Sans always made an effort to keep Papyrus and the people who didn't like him as far away from each other as possible. He didn't think Gaster would agree to teaching Papyrus anyway. Not in 1,000 years. What he would agree to, though, was teaching Sans. Sans knew that even before he asked.
Ah, I had been wondering if you would bring this up. I am glad that you wish to broaden your magical talent, Sans.
It was weird, honestly. Gaster was always so enthusiastic about anything that involved Sans improving himself, ever since Sans had told him just how weak he was, years ago now. Sans had never had the heart to tell Gaster that he was still that weak. The experiment had given Sans more magic and the ability to defend himself, But that was all. Sans himself didn't mind. He was eternally grateful that the experiment had worked at all, but he had a feeling that Gaster would take it personally.
Yeah, well, it's mostly for Papyrus, Sans said as they finished up for the night in the basement labs. I'm pretty happy just having magic at all, but Paps is really into the idea of blue attacks.
I see.
There, that was the look.
Still, I would be happy to teach you. Shall we begin right away?
Before Sans could even respond, Gaster had stretched out a hand toward him. Something somewhere went ding, and an extremely strange sensation flooded out from behind Sans' ribcage. It felt like a hand had gripped his soul. There was a heaviness in his ribs that had nothing to do with sadness. He looked down. There was a blue, heart-shaped glow in his chest.
Oh.
Your soul is blue now,
Gaster said, almost cheerfully.
In a battle, your movements would be greatly limited. Perhaps not even you would be able to dodge then.
Something about the way he said that made Sans shiver a little. He ignored it and raised a brow ridge at Gaster.
Doc, I appreciate it, but I was thinking we could, start this tomorrow. It's late and I'm getting pretty bone-tired.
He looked down at his chest again.
And can you ask next time? Or at least give me some warning?
Gaster blinked at him. He looked genuinely startled.
Oh.
Gaster lowered his hand. The glow and the heaviness vanished. Sans patted down his chest, curious. He hadn't felt his soul so acutely since the experiment.
Goodness, I apologize, Sans.
Gaster rubbed his chin and frowned at some point on the floor.
I was getting ahead of myself. The sensation is quite odd and rather sudden. I should have asked.
Sans tilted his head and gave Gaster a reassuring smile.
Hey, it's fine. Don't sweat it. It's not a big deal. Just kinda surprised me is all.
Gaster didn't look up at him. It was almost as if the doctor had stopped listening, but Sans didn't think that was true. Gaster had been so strange lately. Or, not lately. For over a year now he had been acting different. And whatever it was, it only seemed to be getting worse. Sans was constantly trying to reel him back in. Gaster had done some questionable things, especially with regard to Sans, but the doctor was still his friend.
Hey, Doc, how about a round at Grillby's? We can talk about blue magic some more. Then we can get started on it tomorrow, in between the real work.
Gaster looked up at him and finally smiled a little.
Yes, I think I could go for that.
The following night, Sans went home early. Papyrus was almost vibrating like a Temmie when Sans got back.
There you are, brother! You are 3 minutes later than you said you would be.
Sans gave him a fond smile as he hung up his coat.
Were you timing me? Sorry to keep you waiting.
I can hardly expect you to ever get anywhere on time, you lazy bones.
Papyrus flailed his arms.
But I can forgive you because you are here now and I am very excited.
Yeah? I'm so tired. I was just thinking of watching TV for a bit, then going right to bed.
Sans?
All right.
Sans held up his hands in defeat.
I'm kidding, bro. Just let me put my stuff down. We'd better go outside. Don't want to make a...
Papyrus was out the door with a cackle before Sans could even finish the sentence.
Mess.
There was a small community park a block from their apartment that would serve nicely. At this hour it was mostly deserted, save for a few monster teens having mock battles. Sans and Papyrus found a nice corner of grass away from the kids.
So this is kinda complicated stuff. Don't feel bad if you don't get it right away.
Papyrus stamped his foot impatiently.
I know. Let's just get started.
All right, calm down. So, you're gonna use your telekinesis to sorta grab someone else's soul. Then you can throw bones at them and make them have to jump to avoid them. It's pretty sweet.
Papyrus rubbed his chin and frowned thoughtfully.
But how do I practice something like that without a human to try it on? Oh, how amazing would it be if a human showed up right now?
He whipped his head around as if a human could materialize at any second.
Sans laughed. Looks like we're fresh out of humans, bro, he said. But it works fine on monster souls. You can practice on me.
Oh.
Papyrus looked like he wasn't sure what to make of that.
Are you positive it is safe?
100%. Papyrus put his hands on his hips and thrust out his chest.
Do not fear, brother. I, the great Papyrus, will use caution all the same.
He always did. Well, go ahead, Paps. I'm waiting. Papyrus balled his hands and scrunched up his face, concentrating. He looked funny, thinking so hard. Sans stuffed his hands in his pockets and waited, enjoying the peace and quiet of the balmy night. This was nice. Just practicing magic with his brother, like they'd done when they were kids. No human souls, no time machines, no eerie save points. After a few minutes of nothing, Papyrus opened his eye sockets.
It's not working!
Sans yawned. Just think of your telekinesis, bro. Think of using it to grab my soul. It's gotta be kind of an intuitive thing. Sans lifted a few inches off the ground. He snorted. Not quite. Papyrus set him down gently. He didn't use his telekinesis very often, but he had just as much precise control over it as he did with his bullets.
This is indeed quite difficult. Isn't there a more straightforward way than just thinking hard?
Sorry, Paps. You know how magic is. You gotta feel it. In your bones.
Ah!
Sans chuckled. Papyrus always gave the best reactions to his puns. Don't worry. I said it might take you a while to get the hang of it. There's not much magic out there that can affect someone's soul. Sans paused, trying to think of any other tips he could give. Try to think of it this way. It's actually not that hard to affect someone's soul, right? You can affect someone with how you treat them, the things you say. You affect my soul without even trying. Papyrus pressed his hands to his cheekbones.
Aw, Sans, that is so sweet. That is supposed to be sweet, right?
I guess. But it's the truth, yeah? You're my brother. You know my soul better than I do. So, if affecting my soul isn't hard and using telekinesis isn't hard, then, well, you just gotta find a way to combine those two. Papyrus had a rare moment of quiet as he considered that. Then he gave a decisive nod.
I think I understand, brother. I will try again.
Sans waited. Papyrus wriggled his finger bones experimentally, muttering to himself. Then, less than a minute later, Sans heard a now familiar sound. He couldn't help flinching. The sensation was just so weird.
Oh!
Papyrus exclaimed, and the sensation vanished.
Oh, Sans, I'm sorry. Did that hurt you?
What? Nah, no, Sans said quickly, waving both hands. It's just really sudden when it happens. Hey, you did it, bro. Nicely done. You figured it out so fast. Man, it took me hours. Hours of feeling his soul turn blue over and over. You'd think he'd have gotten used to the feeling, but it still felt strange every time. Not exactly unpleasant either, just... Sans blinked as he figured it out. Ah, that made sense. It made him feel vulnerable. He hadn't realized how much he'd gotten used to not being vulnerable. Papyrus was giving Sans a suspicious look, but Sans could tell he was just barely holding back his glee.
You are certain I did not hurt you?
Sans grinned brightly at him. You never do, bro. Papyrus closed his eye sockets and clenched his fist, mock solemn.
Then that means...
And there he went, shooting off like a rocket and running circles through the park.
Wowee, wowee, I did it! I used blue magic! I can use blue attacks! The great Papyrus achieved hitherto unknown heights of greatness this day!
Sans just laughed and watched his brother go.